Aaliyah's confession to Penny begins not with a dramatic declaration, but with an admission of confusion. The halting, circling kind of confession that so often precedes real self-recognition. And the way she frames her story matters as much as its content, because she describes noticing a woman, a coworker perhaps, someone entirely outside the bounds of her existing life with John, and finding herself struck by something she cannot quite categorize: the particular quality of light in someone's hair, the way she moves through a room. A fascination that lingers far longer and cuts far deeper than mere aesthetic appreciation ought to. And Aaliyah's own language for this experience, comparing it to noticing a beautiful piece of art or an elegant pair of shoes, deserves to be read not as an accurate description of what she is actually feeling, but as a defensive translation. The vocabulary she has reached for because it is safe, because it does not require her to reorganize her sense of herself, because admiring art asks nothing of you, whereas admiring a woman with the intensity Aaliyah is describing asks everything. And this gap between her actual experience and the flattening language she uses to describe it is precisely where the emotional truth of this story lives. When Penny asks directly whether Aaliyah is telling her she's a lesbian, and Aaliyah laughs nervously and deflects, insisting she just has a little thing for redheads for women, followed immediately by, "But I'm not gay." This moment deserves careful unpacking, because the nervous laughter and the immediate correction are doing important defensive work, allowing Aaliyah to name the feeling just enough to finally say it out loud to someone, to relieve some of the pressure of carrying it silently, while simultaneously refusing the label that would make the feeling permanent, socially legible, and irreversible. And many queer women will recognize this exact maneuver from their own lives, the impulse to test the water by describing the feeling in the most minimized language possible. Just a thing for, just noticing, not a big deal, because smallness feels safer than the vertigo of a full admission. And this incremental, hedged way of coming into one's own truth is not evasion so much as self-protection, a way of edging toward an identity before you were ready to live inside it, fully giving yourself room to retreat if the reception is bad or if you're simply not yet ready to face what you've said. Penny's role in this exchange deserves equal attention, because she does not push, does not seize on the contradiction between Aaliyah's stated feelings and her insistence that she isn't gay, does not demand Aaliyah resolve the tension immediately for Penny's own comfort or curiosity, but instead holds space for the uncertainty. And this restraint is itself a form of care that many queer women recognize as precious and rare, the friend who lets you arrive at your own truth on your own timeline rather than needing you to have already arrived before she'll engage with what you're saying. And it is precisely this quality in Penny, her steadiness, her willingness to receive an unfinished, contradictory confession without correcting or rushing it, that makes her the person Aaliyah trusts enough to say any of this to in the first place, which speaks to something important about how queer self-recognition often actually happens, less often through a single decisive realization than through a series of conversations with someone safe enough to think out loud in front of, someone whose reaction you have learned, through history and character, you can trust to be generous rather than punish. The conversation takes a considerably more serious turn when Aaliyah describes John's response to her disclosure, and this shift deserves to be read with real clarity rather than folded gently into the story's romantic register, because what Aaliyah describes, a partner who needs to know her location at all times, who restricts her friendships down to a single approved confidant, who grows jealous and suspicious of her interactions with other women in a way that has nothing to do with reasonable relationship boundaries and everything to do with control, is not evidence of a man processing difficult feelings about his partner's evolving self-understanding in an imperfect but forgivable way. It is a description of coercive control, and Penny's unease about this, her recognition that something in her brother's behavior has shifted into something that constrains, rather than simply reacts to Aaliyah's honesty, deserves to be affirmed by the narrative rather than smoothed into a manageable side detail, because Aaliyah's own attempt to minimize it, insisting she doesn't stare at other women, that it's not a big deal, mirrors a pattern many women, queer and otherwise, will recognize immediately: the instinct to downplay a partner's controlling behavior, to take on the burden of proving her own innocence and restraint rather than naming clearly that the surveillance and restriction themselves are the actual problem, regardless of what she has or hasn't done to supposedly provoke them. This is worth dwelling on because it reflects something the broader culture still struggles to reckon with honestly: the way a woman's growing self-awareness about her own desires, especially desires that complicate an existing relationship, so often gets received not as information her partner should engage with thoughtfully and separately from questions of control, but as a threat to be managed through restriction. and John's response to Aaliyah's disclosure, rather than curiosity or even honest discomfort processed communicatively, becomes instead an excuse to tighten his grip on her movements and her friendships, using her vulnerability as justification for behavior that predates and exceeds anything her disclosure could reasonably explain, and a story willing to name this honestly, through Penny's growing unease rather than through Aaliyah's own minimization, does real service to any audience member who has experienced a partner respond to her honesty with control rather than care. Penny's position at the center of this triangle, loving both her brother and her best friend, wanting badly for the people she loves to be happy together, deserves to be read as a genuinely difficult ethical position, rather than a simple narrative device, because she is being asked, implicitly, to help maintain a peace that depends on Aaliyah continuing to minimize both her own emerging self-understanding and her partner's controlling behavior. And the real test of this story lies in whether Penny is willing to prioritize her actual love for Aaliyah, which would mean supporting her friend's honest self-discovery and naming the coercive control for what it is, even at the cost of family harmony, over a more comfortable but ultimately hollow loyalty to keeping everyone technically together. And this tension between comfort and honesty, between preserving a familiar structure and supporting someone's growth even when that growth threatens to dismantle the structure entirely, is a dilemma many women recognize from their own friendships. The moment when loving someone well means telling her an uncomfortable truth about her relationship, rather than simply hoping things work out. What makes this version of the story valuable as a piece of queer-adjacent storytelling is its refusal to resolve Aaliyah's self-discovery neatly or quickly, allowing her to sit in the genuine uncertainty of not yet knowing what her feelings mean for her identity or her relationship, while still taking seriously, through Penny's clear-eyed concern, the actual danger of a partner who responds to vulnerability with control rather than communication, and this combination, tenderness toward Aaliyah's unfinished process of self-understanding, alongside clarity about the coercive dynamics she's minimizing, offers something genuinely useful to any woman navigating the difficult, often non-linear process of realizing that her desires may not fit the shape of the life she has already built, and to any friend, like Penny, trying to figure out how to support that process honestly without either pushing too hard or staying dangerously silent about what she can see clearly from the outside.